A night I will never forget, my encounter with the unknown. I was 10 years old the first time I felt true fear. Not the kind of fear you get from hearing a strange noise in the middle of the night or watching an eerie episode of The Twilight Zone. No, this was something deeper, something that left a mark on me that would never quite fade. Even now, after all these years, the memory still lingers in my mind, as vivid as the cold winter night it first happened. It was December of 1995, a time when the world still felt large and mysterious. I grew up in a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest event of the year was the Christmas parade down Main Street. My childhood home was an old colonial-style house, passed down through generations. It creaked in the winter wind, but to me, it always felt safe until that night. The snow had been falling for hours, covering the streets and rooftops in a thick, undisturbed blanket. My parents had just tucked me into bed, the glow of my nightlight casting long shadows on the walls. I remember listening to the muffled sound of the television from the living room, the familiar voices of late-night talk show hosts comforting me as I drifted toward sleep. But something woke me, a strange hum, faint at first, almost like the low vibration of a distant power line. It was steady, rhythmic, and unlike anything I had ever heard before. I opened my eyes, blinking in the dim glow of my nightlight. That's when I saw it. A brilliant white light beamed through my bedroom window, brighter than the headlights of a car, yet eerily silent. My heart pounded as I turned my head toward the source of the light. And then, standing in the doorway, was something to this day. I struggle to describe what I saw. It wasn't a man, and it certainly wasn't a shadow. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally in the dim glow of the light. Its skin or whatever covered its body shimmered, reflecting the light in a way that made it difficult to focus on. But the part I remember most, part that still sends a shiver down my spine, was its eyes. They weren't human, large, dark, and unblinking. They locked onto me as the figure slowly reached out its hand. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body was frozen in place. The air in the room felt heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, and a strange buzzing filled my ears. It wasn't until the very last second, just as the figure's long fingers were about to touch me, that my instincts finally kicked in. I squeezed my eyes shut and yanked the covers over my head, my small hands clutching the sheets as if they could somehow shield me from whatever was in the room. I held my breath, waiting. Seconds passed, then minutes. The hum faded. The air returned to normal when I finally found the courage to peek out. The light was gone. The figure was gone for a long time. I told myself it was just a dream, a trick of the light, a child's overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew better, because after that night, I was never alone again. The feeling of being watched is hard to explain unless you've experienced it yourself. It's not paranoia, not exactly. It's more like a presence, a constant awareness that someone, somewhere, is observing your every move. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I convinced myself that it was nothing more than childhood fear, lingering long after the nightmare had ended, but the signs were always there. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night and find my bedroom window slightly open, even though I knew for a fact I had locked it before bed. Other times, I would hear that strange hum again, faint, almost imperceptible, but always there. And then there were the dreams. They started subtly at first, flashes of light, distorted voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. But over time, they became more vivid. I would see places I had never been, landscapes that didn't belong on Earth, strange symbols pulsating with energy, floating in the air like they were alive. And always, always, the eyes, watching, waiting. I never told anyone. Not my parents. not my friends. What could I say? That I was being haunted by something that shouldn't exist? That I felt like my thoughts weren't always my own? That sometimes when I looked in the mirror, I wasn't entirely sure I recognized the person staring back at me? No, I kept it to myself. Years passed. Life went on, but the feeling never left. And then, one day, I came across something that changed everything. It was late December 1999. The world was caught in the grip of Y2K paranoia, with people stocking up on supplies, fearing that computers would fail when the clock struck midnight on January 1st. I was in college by then, studying journalism, spending late nights in the library researching topics that fascinated me. That's when I stumbled upon a document posted on a small, obscure forum dedicated to conspiracy theories. It was called The Lerta Files. The title alone was enough to send a chill down my spine. As I read through the pages, my heart pounded harder with each word. It was a transcript allegedly from an interview conducted with a non-human reptilian being. A female reptilian being, her name was Lerta. She claimed that her species had been on Earth for millions of years, long before humans even existed. That they had lived alongside our ancestors, watching as we evolved. That they had built vast underground cities, hidden from human eyes. And then, one sentence stopped me cold. Some of us choose to observe certain individuals closely. Once we have made contact, we do not leave. We watch. We learn. I sat back in my chair, the words swimming before my eyes. Had I been watched all these years? Had I been chosen for some reason I couldn't understand? Or worse, had I already been marked for something yet to come? That night, I barely slept. Over the following weeks, I tried to convince myself that it was just another internet hoax. After all, the document had no verified source, no concrete evidence to support its claims. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something to it, something that felt true. And so, I began to dig deeper. I reached out to others who had read the Lerta Files. I scoured old books, obscure websites, and forgotten newspaper articles. And the more I learned, the more disturbed I became, because the stories were always the same. People who had seen lights in the night. People who had felt an unseen presence following them. People who had been visited by beings they couldn't explain, and who had never been the same afterward. And now, here I am, years later, finally ready to talk about it. Maybe you believe me. Maybe you don't. That's okay. But if you've ever had the feeling that you weren't alone, if you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt like someone or something was watching you, then maybe, just maybe, you already know the truth, because once they find you, they never really leave. In the winter of 1999, a strange file appeared on obscure internet forums dedicated to conspiracy theories. The document, posted anonymously, quickly caught the attention of a small but dedicated group of researchers who had long been fascinated by tales of hidden civilizations, extraterrestrial visitors, and government cover-ups. It was titled simply, The Lerta Files. At first glance, the document seemed like just another elaborate hoax, another tall tale among the thousands circulating in the murky corners of the internet. But something about it was different. It was not just a vague report or a second-hand retelling of a strange sighting. Instead, it was a full transcript of an alleged interview conducted direction a being that claimed to have lived on Earth for millions of years, hidden beneath the surface. According to the file, the interview took place on December 16, 1999, in a small, isolated home in southern Sweden. The human interviewer, who remained anonymous and referred to himself only as Old K, had first learned about this reptilian being from a friend identified only by the initials F, who had been in contact with her for several months. The reptilian, calling herself Lerta, had allegedly agreed to meet Old K in person, despite his initial skepticism. A meeting in the dark of winter, The document described the setting in detail. The house was old. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, and the thick winter air made the walls feel colder than usual. A single lamp in the corner cast dim light, flickering as if struggling against an unseen force. The air was thick with anticipation, and as the clock struck an undisclosed hour, the door opened and she entered. Lurda was unlike anything Old Kay had ever seen. Her skin was greenish beige, with small brown markings along her face and arms. She had large almond-shaped eyes with black, slit-like pupils, surrounded by a bright green iris. Her hands were slender, with elongated fingers that seemed more dexterous than a human's, and small, sharp horns protruded from her middle fingers, a feature that, according to her, had once served a purpose for her ancestors. She moved with deliberate grace, her posture upright, but with an uncanny fluidity, as if her body was built for both stealth and precision. She wore loose, flowing clothing, though she admitted that it was only for the sake of making humans feel comfortable. Her species, she explained, typically did not wear clothing when among their own kind. As she sat across from Old Kay, her gaze seemed to pierce through him, studying his every movement, as if gauging whether he was truly ready to hear what she had to say, a species that came before humans. According to Lurda, her species had existed on Earth long before humans ever walked the land. While modern science suggested that Homo sapiens evolved around 300,000 years ago, Lurda claimed that her people had been here for millions of years. "We are the native inhabitants of this planet," she stated plainly. "Humans are not." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. She explained that her species had evolved from an ancient line of reptiles, surviving the catastrophic events that wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Unlike their less intelligent counterparts, her ancestors had adapted, seeking refuge underground to avoid natural disasters and later to escape the increasing dominance of early humans. "You think of the dinosaurs as long gone," she continued, "but not all of us perished. Some of us evolved. We built cities before humans learned to make fire." Old Kay listened, struggling to process what he was hearing. It was one thing to speculate about hidden civilizations or even aliens visiting Earth, but the idea that an advanced race of reptilian beings had coexisted and possibly competed with early humans was almost too much to believe. Lurda seemed to sense his skepticism. "I know this is difficult for you," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You have been taught to believe that your species is the only one that matters, that your rise was inevitable, that humans are the dominant force on this planet. But that is a lie that was created to keep you from asking questions, the underground cities." When asked where her species lived now, Lurda explained that they resided in vast subterranean cities, hidden deep beneath the Earth's crust. Some were miles below the surface, while others were located beneath the ocean floor, in regions where no human technology could easily detect them. "These cities are ancient," she said, "some of them built before the ice ages, others even older. We have access to technologies that would seem like magic to you." She described transportation systems that used magnetic levitation, allowing them to travel at speeds incomprehensible to the human mind. There were energy sources that did not rely on fossil fuels, instead harnessing natural electromagnetic fields of the Earth. Most shocking of all was her claim that her species still influences human affairs today, but not in the way most conspiracy theories suggest. "We do not control human leaders as some of your kind believe," she clarified. "But we do observe. We do protect our own interests. And sometimes we must intervene, the reason for secrecy." Perhaps the most pressing question Old Kay had was why her species chose to remain hidden. If they had such advanced technology, if they had lived here for millions of years, why not make their presence known? Lurda's expression darkened slightly. "Because humans are dangerous," she said simply. "You are unpredictable. violent. Fearful of what you do not understand, she pointed out how humans react with hostility to anything they perceive as a threat. Wars had been fought over differences in religion, skin color, and ideology. How, then, would humanity react to a completely different species sharing their planet? We have seen what happens when humans discover something they do not control, she said. They seek to dominate it, weaponize it, or destroy it. Still, she admitted that not all humans were a danger. Some had proven curious, open-minded, willing to understand. But for now, their existence remained a closely guarded secret, one that, according to her, would eventually be revealed when the time was right. The interview ends, but the questions remain. The interview reportedly lasted 3 hours and 6 minutes. By the end, Old K found himself overwhelmed. He had come into the meeting skeptical, even dismissive, but the experience had left him shaken. Lurdy refused to allow any photographs, stating that her kind had strict rules about being captured on film. However, she permitted drawings to be made and even hinted that she might provide proof in a future meeting. After she left, Old K sat in silence. The room felt colder. The walls, once seemingly sturdy, now felt thin, as if something greater lurked just beyond them. He later sent the transcript of their conversation to 4 trusted individuals across Finland, Norway, Germany, and France, hoping they would translate and spread the information. But would people believe it? As he himself admitted in the closing lines of his transcript, "I know how unbelievable this all sounds, but I was there. I saw her with my own eyes. Whether you choose to believe it or not, it does not change the truth. The hidden truth behind the reptilian conspiracy." For decades, conspiracy theories have captured the imaginations of people across America. From the assassination of President John F. Kennedy to the moon landing debates, there's always been an undercurrent of skepticism in the American psyche. But among all the theories that have surfaced over the years, few are as polarizing or as bizarre as the belief in reptilian overlords. This idea didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was first popularized by David Icke, a British author. Extraterrestrial reptiles that complete world domination. A theory that refuses to die. If you turn on the news today, it's easy to see why some people find this idea compelling. Powerful figures, from CEOs to politicians, often seem to operate in ways that leave the average American wondering, are they really working for us? The idea-faith notion that they might not even be human. That's something different. David Icke's theory gained a cult following in the late 90s and early 2000s, especially among those who are already skeptical of mainstream narratives. His books, including The Biggest Secret D. By the time the internet became a household staple, the reptilian theory had taken on a life of its own. Forums, chat rooms, and later YouTube channels became flooded with videos claiming to expose these beings in action. Proof T. Media manipulation or manufactured distraction. For those who dismiss the idea outright, the common response is, "This is ridiculous. It's a fairy tale for the paranoid." The media itself plays a role in discrediting the idea. They believe it precisely so that it seems laughable. But the general public won't take it seriously. It's an old trick. Hide the truth in plain sight by making it look absurd. It's the same reason, some argue, that Hollywood has been flooding the entertainment industry with alien movies and sci-fi thrillers for decades. If repto, this is just like the movies. It can't be real. To an older generation, this kind of media strategy might not seem far-fetched. After all, wasn't the public kept in the dark about UFOs for years? The government dismissed sightings as hoaxes or weather balloons until recently, when they finally admitted that yes, unidentified aerial phenomena UAPs do exist. If they were willing to suppress that information for decades, what else might they be hiding? A question of control. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of the reptilian theory isn't the idea of scaly aliens hiding in plain sight. It's the underlying fear that our world is not what it seems. The average American, particularly older generations who have lived through times of great change, understands how power operates behind closed doors. Governments rise and fall, corporations expand their reach, and technology reshapes society faster than we can keep up with. For many, the reptilian theory is less about literal lizard people and more about the belief that unseen forces dictate the course of history. Some compare it to the concerns surrounding globalism, financial elites, and secret societies, all of which have documented histories of influence. In fact, even those who don't believe in reptilians at all still acknowledge that world leaders often operate above the law. Whether it's backroom deals, classified intelligence operations, or multinational corporations holding more power than elected officials, the reality is that the average citizen has very little control over the forces shaping their lives. Why the theory persists. The human brain is wired to recognize patterns. It's why we see faces in clouds or find familiar shapes in shadows. When people notice similarities between ancient legends of serpent gods, modern stories of reptilian rulers, and the bizarre behavior of certain elites, pieces start to connect whether there's truth to them or not. Some believers point to ancient civilizations, like the Sumerians, who documented interactions with gods they described as serpentine or dragon-like. The Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. In Asian mythology, dragons were wise, powerful beings that often influenced human affairs. Could these legends be echoes of a time when reptilian beings walked among us? Skeptics argue that these are just symbolic representations, that ancient people used animals to depict characteristics like wisdom, power, and mystery. But for those who follow the reptilian theory, these patterns are too widespread to be mere coincidence. Final thoughts? A theory or a warning? So, where does that leave us? The reptilian theory is one of the most enduring and controversial conspiracies in modern history. It has been laughed at, dismissed, and ridiculed, but it has never disappeared. For some, it's a warning. Pay attention to who is really in control. Maybe it's not lizard people, but maybe it doesn't need to be. Whether the theory is true or not, the underlying concerns remain relevant. Who holds the power? Who makes the decisions? And why do the people at the top seem so disconnected from the rest of us? At the very least, the reptilian theory serves as a reminder to question what we're told, to look beyond the surface, and to keep an open mind just in case the truth really is stranger than fiction. The Reptilian Visitor, a tale of hidden histories. The fire crackled gently in the old brick hearth, casting long shadows across the wooden walls of the cabin. The warmth was comforting against the cold December night, but the man sitting in the leather armchair barely noticed. He leaned forward, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, eyes fixed on the strange woman before him. She wasn't human. Not quite. Her skin was a pale greenish beige, speckled with small brown dots along her arms and forehead. Her large, cat-like eyes reflected the flickering firelight, their dark slit pupils narrowing slightly as she regarded him. Her lips, thin and pale, curved in something that resembled a smile, but it wasn't quite right. Not human, not entirely. He had met her before. The first time had been unsettling. She had walked into the room as if she belonged there, dressed in simple, loose-fitting clothes that barely concealed her oddly smooth skin. When she had spoken, her voice was calm, deliberate almost too precise, as though each word had been carefully chosen to avoid misunderstanding. "Would you like to know the truth?" she had asked. Now he was here again, drawn back by curiosity, by the need to understand. She had told him she was part of a species far older than humanity, a race that had lived on Earth for millions of years before people ever learned to build fires or craft tools from stone. Tonight, She had promised to answer his questions honestly, fully. Taking a breath, he finally spoke. "Why do you look so much like us?" She tilted her head, considering the question. "Our species evolved separately from yours," she explained, her long fingers resting lightly on the wooden table. "But in nature, function often determines form. Over time, we adapted. We learned to stand upright, just as your ancestors did. We developed hands capable of grasping, shaping, creating. Evolution is not bound to one path it branches, sometimes in unexpected ways." He nodded, though his mind struggled to grasp the full meaning. "And your features?" He gestured toward her eyes, her skin, the barely perceptible ridges along her spine that had caught his attention before. "Our eyesight is sharper than yours, especially in the dark," she said. "Our pupils expand and contract more than yours do, adjusting to light more efficiently. It allows us to see clearly in places where you would be blind." She glanced toward the window, where the night stretched endlessly over the frozen hills. "In the past, that gave us an advantage. We could hunt when others could not. We could see movement long before it reached us." Her fingers drummed lightly against the wood, a rhythmic sound like rain tapping against a window. "Our skin is different because it was shaped by our world, our need for warmth, for protection. We do not regulate our body temperature as you do. Instead, we absorb heat, store it. That is why we prefer the sun. When we sit in sunlight, our energy increases. Our thoughts sharpen, our bodies strengthen." He frowned. "Then why live underground?" A shadow crossed her face, subtle, but noticeable. "We did not always," she admitted. "Once, long ago, we lived in the open, in great cities that stretched across the land. But time changed things. Your kind changed things." She exhaled, though he wasn't sure if it was a sigh or something else. "We withdrew because we had to survive." There was something in her voice, something that made him uneasy. But he pushed forward. "And you're kind, you're all like you?" She gave that almost smile again. "There are differences, as with any species. Our males are often taller, stronger. Their skin is sometimes darker, their features sharper. Their claws grow longer." "Claws?" She lifted a hand and flexed her fingers. Her nails were longer than a human's, darker, almost gray. "Not as you imagine," she said. "We do not use them as weapons, not often. They serve their purpose, helping us grasp, climb, defend if necessary." She let her hand drop. "Our young are born differently from yours. We do not carry them in the way human women do." He hesitated, unsure if he should ask, but she saw the question in his eyes. "We are not mammals," she said simply, "but evolution has shaped us in ways that are similar. Our young develop within us, but they are not nourished by our bodies in the same way. Instead, they are contained within a protective shell, a soft, thin casing. Unlike the eggs you imagine." His grip tightened on his coffee mug. "You lay eggs?" "Of a sort," she nodded, "but not as your birds do. When our young are ready, they emerge as yours do, small, fragile, needing care. They are born with the instincts they need, but they must still learn, still grow. Much like your own." The thought unsettled him. They were so alien, yet so familiar. She leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the table. "We have lived alongside your kind for longer than you know. We have watched, studied. Some of us have walked among you, learning your ways, your thoughts. But we remain hidden, because it must be so." "Why?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "Because your kind fears what it does not understand." The fire crackled again, louder this time. The wind howled outside, rattling the old wooden window frames. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how isolated they were, just the two of them in this small cabin, surrounded by miles of empty wilderness. "If you fear us, then why reveal yourselves at all?" he asked, his voice steadier now. She exhaled softly. "Because things are changing. The world is shifting. Your kind is reaching beyond what was once impossible. Soon, you will see more than you ever have before. And when that time comes, it is better that some of you understand." A chill ran down his spine, and it had nothing to do with the cold outside. He set his mug down, the ceramic clinking softly against the wooden table. His mind swirled with questions, uncertainties, but he knew he would not get all the answers tonight. Perhaps not ever. She watched him carefully, as if measuring his reaction. Then, slowly, she stood. "It is late," she said. "You should rest." He glanced at the old clock on the mantel. Nearly midnight when he looked back. She was already moving toward the door, her steps eerily silent. She paused, her hand on the handle. "Do not speak of this to those who will not listen," she warned. "The truth is not for everyone." And then, just like that, she was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the threshold. He sat in silence for a long time, the fire burning low, the embers casting a dim red glow. He wanted to believe it was all a dream, some strange trick of the mind, but deep down, he knew better. The reptilian past, a forgotten history of Earth, a time before humans. Imagine, if you will, a world long before humans roamed the Earth. Not the world of cowboys and pioneers, nor even the time of ancient civilizations like the Egyptians or Romans. No, I'm talking about something much older, millions of years before the first human ever took a step. During this time, the world was vastly different. The great reptiles, the dinosaurs, ruled the land. Towering predators like the Tyrannosaurus rex hunted in the dense jungles, while massive, gentle giants like the Brachiosaurus grazed in lush, prehistoric valleys. Oceans were teeming with creatures larger than any modern whale, and the skies were dominated by winged reptiles that could have cast shadows over entire villages had they existed today. But among these beasts, a different kind of reptile walked the earth, one that would later claim to be the true natives of this planet, the rise of the first intelligent reptiles. While history books teach that no intelligent beings existed before humans, this story suggests otherwise. Deep in the thick forests and mountainous landscapes of prehistoric Earth, a particular species of reptile was evolving. Unlike the massive dinosaurs, this species was smaller, perhaps 5 feet tall, but it walked onto legs. It had hands, not unlike our own, capable of grasping objects and using primitive tools. Over millions of years, these creatures grew more intelligent. They learned to harness fire, carve shelters into the rock, and even develop rudimentary societies. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. These reptilian ancestors, as the story goes, were not just another species of dinosaur. They were something far more significant, the first advanced civilization on Earth. While humans were still nothing more than tiny primates swinging from trees, these reptilians were already building underground cities and developing technologies beyond anything the early world had seen, a cataclysmic war from the stars. However, their dominance did not go unchallenged. According to this account, around 65 million years ago, Earth became the battlefield for a war between two alien species. One group, humanoid in nature, came from a distant solar system in the Procyon constellation. The other was a highly advanced reptilian species from a different dimension altogether. This was not a war fought with swords and arrows. It was a war of unimaginable power. The skies burned with the fury of their battleships, and weapons of devastating capability rained destruction upon the planet. These extraterrestrial forces were not fighting over land or resources in the way we might think. No, their battle was over something even more fundamental: raw materials, particularly copper. Why copper? To us, copper is a familiar metal used in everything from electrical wiring to pennies. But to these ancient beings, copper was something far more valuable. It is said that when combined with certain unstable elements and placed under extreme electromagnetic radiation, copper could create new, highly advanced materials. If this sounds like something out of science fiction, consider this. Even in modern science, researchers are constantly uncovering new ways to manipulate elements at a quantum level. Could it be possible that advanced civilizations, millions of years ahead of us, had already discovered secrets about copper that we are only beginning to understand? Whatever the reason, the two alien factions were willing to destroy entire species just to claim control over Earth's resources. The day the dinosaurs vanished. This war led to an event that would later be misinterpreted by human scientists as an asteroid impact, the very event believed to have wiped out the dinosaurs. But according to this story, there was no asteroid. Instead, the reptilian invaders, losing ground in battle, deployed a powerful fusion bomb unlike conventional nuclear weapons. This device didn't just explode, it altered the very environment of the planet. The detonation triggered a massive release of radiation, combined with a sudden and catastrophic change in atmospheric conditions. Fires swept across entire continents, filling the air with thick clouds of ash. A deadly nuclear winter settled over the Earth, plunging temperatures to deadly lows. Within just a few decades, most life on Earth was wiped out. The mighty dinosaurs, once the rulers of the planet, could not adapt to the freezing climate. Their reign had come to an end, but not all perished. Survival below the surface. The story continues with an incredible claim. Some members of the reptilian species survived by going underground. While the surface of Earth became a frozen wasteland, pockets of warmth still existed beneath the Earth's crust. Hidden away in vast caverns, these reptilians continued to evolve in secret. For millions of years, they remained hidden, waiting for the Earth to heal. As the ice receded and new forms of life began to emerge, the reptilians watched. They saw mammals, once small and insignificant, grow larger and more intelligent. They saw early primates descend from the trees and begin to walk on two legs. And then, something happened that changed everything. A new species emerges. Approximately 1.5 million years ago, another alien species arrived on Earth. This new group, called the Elohim, was not interested in copper or war. They were interested in something else, the early ancestors of humankind. Unlike the reptilians who had evolved naturally on Earth, humans were allegedly created through genetic manipulation. The Elohim, using their advanced knowledge of DNA, sped up human evolution, crafting us into the intelligent beings we are today. But why? Some believe it was because they needed workers, a species intelligent enough to follow orders, but not advanced enough to resist. Others claim it was an experiment, a way to create a new form of life, unlike anything the universe had seen before. Whatever the reason, this event led to another war, this time between the reptilians and the Elohim. The reptilians, who had lived in secrecy for millions of years, did not take kindly to these newcomers interfering with the planet they considered their own, a hidden conflict that continues today. While history books remain silent on these ancient battles, some claim the war never truly ended. Instead, it has continued in secrecy for thousands of years. According to this theory, the reptilians still exist today, living beneath the Earth's surface in vast underground cities. Some believe they have infiltrated human society, assuming positions of power in governments and financial institutions. Others suggest they are simply waiting for the right moment to reclaim the surface world. Could it be possible that remnants of this war still influence our world today? Are the stories of strange, unexplained disappearances, secret underground bases, and sightings of reptilian-like beings connected to this ancient conflict? We may never know for sure, what this story means for us today. Regardless of whether one believes in these accounts, they offer a fascinating perspective on the unknown history of our planet. They challenge us to reconsider the past and to question whether we have truly uncovered all the secrets buried beneath the Earth's surface. Even if this is just a story, it speaks to something deep within us, our desire to understand where we came from and who else might be out there. And perhaps, just perhaps, if we ever do uncover the full truth, we may realize that we were never alone to begin with. The arrival of the Elohim, when the gods came down. In the vast, uncharted history of our planet, long before written words, towering cities, and the first sparks of human civilization, Earth was already a battleground. But the battle was not between men. It was not fought with swords or arrows. It was not even a war that humankind, in its infancy, could have understood. It was a war between beings who, to our ancestors, would have seemed like gods. Around 1.5 million years ago, while our early ancestors still roamed the African plains, another kind of intelligence descended from the skies. They came not for conquest, nor for war at least, not at first. They came with a plan, a vision that would reshape the very fabric of life on Earth. These beings, known in later human mythologies as the Elohim, were unlike anything our world had seen before. The Elohim were a race of interstellar travelers, moving between the stars with technology beyond comprehension. They were not the first extraterrestrial visitors to set foot on Earth, far from it. The planet had already been home to another intelligent species, the reptilian beings who had ruled the underworld and remained hidden from human eyes. These ancient reptilian creatures, who had evolved from the remnants of the dinosaurs, had long considered Earth theirs. But the Elohim had no interest in the reptilians. Their eyes were fixed on a far more primitive species, one that, at the time, was no more than a collection of small, ape-like creatures struggling to survive in the harsh world around them. These were the distant ancestors of modern humans, living in scattered groups, foraging for food, and doing their best to outrun predators. To the Elohim, these early primates were not just animals. They were raw material. The experiment begins. The Elohim were not simple conquerors. They were genetic sculptors, architects of life itself. Whether their motivations were scientific curiosity, a grand cosmic mission, or something more sinister remains unknown. But one thing was certain: they saw potential in these creatures, and they intended to reshape them into something greater. Using genetic manipulation techniques that even today remain beyond human understanding, the Elohim began their work. Over the course of thousands of years, what must have seemed like an eternity, to the primitive primates, they altered the DNA of these early hominins, accelerating their evolution, tweaking their minds, and refining their bodies. For the first time, these beings, our ancestors, began to think in ways they never had before. Their hands, once clumsy and built for climbing, became more dexterous. Their posture straightened. Their minds, which once understood only fear and survival, began to comprehend symbols, emotions, and primitive forms of speech. The Elohim had set something into motion that could not be undone. But why? Why would an advanced race from the stars take such an interest in shaping a species that, at the time, had no significance in the cosmic order? The answer, perhaps, is one that many ancient texts and myths have hinted at for centuries. The Elohim were not creating equals, they were creating servants, the first slaves of the Elohim. For all their intelligence and power, the Elohim were not self-sufficient. They required labor, whether it was for mining rare earth minerals, constructing vast underground facilities, or performing tasks that were too menial for such an advanced species. They needed a workforce. And they found their answer in the newly created humans. The first generations of genetically altered humans were not free. They were taught only what was necessary to perform their duties. The Elohim used their advanced technology to instill obedience. Through methods lost to history, they ensured that early humans remained loyal, docile, and unquestioning. Yet, despite their efforts, something unexpected happened. The genetic changes the Elohim had introduced were too profound. The spark of self-awareness had been ignited, and it could not be extinguished. These early humans, instead of remaining obedient workers, began to develop independent thought. They questioned. They dreamed. And most dangerously of all, they believed. The rise of worship, when slaves became believers. To the Elohim, the human response was likely baffling. These beings had been created for labor, yet they were beginning to see their masters as something else entirely, gods. The primitive human mind, faced with beings who could control the skies, manipulate matter, and command forces beyond comprehension, could not help but worship them. In the eyes of early humankind, the Elohim were divine, and they were treated as such. Temples were built. Rituals were performed. The Elohim had come to enslave, but instead, they were exalted. Over time, the lines blurred. What had begun as a mere workforce turned into a civilization under celestial rule. The Elohim, who had once sought only workers, found themselves at the center of a new religious order. And in this, perhaps they saw an opportunity, the war with the Reptilians. The Elohim's growing presence on Earth did not go unnoticed. Deep underground, the reptilian species that had long considered Earth their domain saw the rise of humanity with growing alarm. To them, the Elohim were invaders, trespassing on territory that had belonged to their kind for millions of years. More importantly, they saw the genetic modifications of humans as a threat. A conflict was inevitable. The war between the Elohim and the Reptilians was not fought with swords or spears, but with technologies that defy understanding. The battlefields were not just physical, but mental and energetic. The Reptilians, who possessed abilities that bordered on the supernatural telepathy, manipulation of matter, and even control over human perception, began to wage a hidden war against the Elohim and their newly created human followers for generations. The war raged in the shadows, unknown to the very species that had sparked the conflict, the disappearance of the Elohim. At some point, whether through a truce, an act of betrayal, or simply their own mysterious reasons, the Elohim left. Their departure was sudden, leaving behind ruins, legends, and a species that was now free to shape its own destiny. But the war was far from over. Though the Elohim had vanished, the Reptilians remained. They retreated into their subterranean cities, continuing their work in the shadows, influencing the course of human history in ways few would ever suspect. Even today, some believe they never truly left. Final thoughts, a legacy in the shadows. What remains of the Elohim's influence today? Some say that traces of their genetic experiments still exist within us. That the reason humankind evolved so rapidly, far faster than nature should have allowed, was because of their intervention. Others believe that, despite their departure, the Elohim still watch from a distance, waiting for the right moment to return. And then, of course, there are those who claim that they never left at all, that their descendants walk among us, hidden in plain sight, shaping the world as they have since the beginning. The truth may never be fully known. But one thing is certain, the story of the Elohim is far from over. Perhaps one day, the gods will return, or maybe, just maybe, they never left. As the fire crackled softly in the dimly lit study, Chris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The weight of the words he had just read lingered in the air like the last echoes of a long-forgotten melody. He knew this story would divide his audience. Some would dismiss it outright as fantasy, while others would find themselves drawn into its mysteries, compelled to search for the unseen threads woven throughout human history. He took a slow sip of coffee, its warmth grounding him in the present. For a moment, He imagined himself in the shoes of that anonymous man in Sweden, sitting across from a being whose very existence defied everything he had been taught about the world. What would it be like to look into those slit-pupiled eyes, to hear the steady, measured cadence of a voice that carried 10 million years of untold history? Lerda's story wasn't just about a lost civilization of reptilian beings. It was about the fragile nature of human perception. If the world had once been ruled by an advanced race of intelligent reptiles, where were they now? Why did they hide beneath the surface while humanity reshaped the planet in its own image? Were they merely observers, watching from the shadows? Or were they still, in some way, pulling the strings? Chris set down his mug and reached for a well-worn leather journal beside him. He flipped through the pages his own notes, scribbled over years of research into ancient myths, lost civilizations, and unexplained phenomena. The echoes of Lerda's words could be found in countless legends, stretching across continents and centuries. The serpent gods of the Mayans, the Nagas of Hindu mythology, the dragon emperors of China. Was it possible that these were all distorted memories of an ancient race that once walked the earth? The idea wasn't new. Writers, historians, and conspiracy theorists had debated for decades whether mankind had been influenced, perhaps even controlled, by a hidden force. The book of Genesis spoke of a serpent that gifted knowledge to humanity, an act that changed the course of history. But what if that story wasn't a metaphor? What if the serpent wasn't just a symbol of temptation, but a real entity, whispering secrets into the ears of early man? He thought back to something Lerda had said in the transcript. You believe you are the crown of creation, yet you do not see how fragile your place in this world truly is. It was a chilling statement, one that hinted at a deeper truth. What if humans weren't the dominant species on Earth, but merely the ones allowed to believe they were? It reminded him of a story his grandfather had told him when he was a boy. His grandfather had served in World War II and had seen things he refused to talk about until his final years. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the humid air, the old man had spoken in a hushed tone. "The world ain't what it seems, son," he had said, staring off into the distance. "We live in a house of mirrors, and the folks who built it don't want us to see what's behind the glass. Double quotes. At the time, Chris had dismissed it as the ramblings of an old soldier who had seen too much. But now, decades later, those words came rushing back with unsettling clarity. What had his grandfather seen? What had he known that the rest of the world refused to acknowledge? He exhaled slowly, glancing at the pages before him. The story of Lerda wasn't just about the past, it was about the present and possibly even the future. If her claims were true, then humanity was standing on the edge of a great revelation. A hidden war had been waged for millennia, a struggle between forces beyond human comprehension. The war hadn't ended, it had simply gone underground. A shiver ran down his spine as he considered the implications. How many of the world's greatest events had been influenced by unseen hands? How much of history had been guided not by kings and presidents, but by those who had remained in the shadows? He thought about the modern world, about the increasing number of UFO sightings, government disclosures, and whispered rumors of underground bases. If the reptilians had once ruled openly, what had changed? What had driven them into hiding? Or worse, had they ever really left at all? Chris ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing with questions. The transcript hinted at a coming war, a conflict that had been quietly brewing for centuries. Was this war already happening in ways people couldn't see? Was it a battle of influence, fought in the highest levels of government and industry? Or was it something more primal, something waiting to erupt into full-scale confrontation? For the first time in years, he felt a strange sense of unease settle over him. It wasn't fear. Exactly, it was more like standing at the edge of a vast canyon, staring into the unknown. The truth, whatever it was lay somewhere beyond that abyss. And once he stepped forward, there would be no turning back. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. He glanced at the clock. Midnight. His heart pounded slightly faster than he liked. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he stood up and moved toward the door. The house was silent, the only sound the faint creaking of the old wooden floor beneath his feet. He hesitated for a moment before reaching for the handle. As he opened the door, the night air rushed in, cool and heavy with the scent of rain. But the porch was empty. No visitor, no shadowy figure waiting in the dark, just the wind, whispering through the trees. He let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Maybe I've been reading too much into this, he thought. But as he turned to close the door, something caught his eye. A single small mark etched into the wooden frame, so faint it could have been a trick of the light, a symbol, a serpent, curled into a circle with 7 tiny stars at its center. His breath caught in his throat. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at it, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching from the darkness. Then, without a word, he stepped back inside, locked the door, and pulled the curtains shut because some questions weren't meant to be answered, not yet.